Hello! Welcome to Actual Spinster. Today I'm going to do a January and February reading wrap up. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about what I read in the past 2 months. The first book I read in January was Tausiel and Eleanor by Garth Nix, which I listened to on audiobook and was one of my anticipated releases from 2021 because I love the series that it's in, which is the Old Kingdom series, and it tells the story of Sabriel's parents, and Sabriel is the first book of the series, and she, her dad is an apostle and stuff, so it tells his story from when he was a young kid meeting Sabriel's mum. And it's fine, I was excited for it, but I also had tempered my excitement because it's a prequel, and I really didn't like Clariel, which was also a prequel, but I have loved the main 3 books in the series, Sabriel, Lyriel and Abhorsen, and I did also really like Golden Hand, but definitely less so than those main core 3. And yeah, it was kind of a romance because obviously they do kind of have to get together because that Sabriel is a being, but yeah, it was enjoyable. I definitely, wasn't my favourite book, but I really loved the world, and yeah, it was fine. It was a little bit predictable but satisfying and entertaining and nice. But if you haven't read the series, I definitely wouldn't recommend starting there. I definitely recommend starting with Sabriel, which is now not chronologically the first, but was published first and definitely is the best place to start the series, because I tried to read Clariel for a long time and it locked me out the rest of the series, or so I thought, but then when I gave up and I just read Sabriel, I got deep into it quick. The next book I read was The Pinhole Egg by Diana Wynne Jones, which is the 6th, I think, book in the Chrestomanci series, and this one is less about Chrestomanci and more about the people around Chrestomanci, and obviously that's kind of true for all of them, but it's less about people in Chrestomanci's house and more about people in the villages around where he lives, and it's about the Pinhoes, obviously, Pinhole Egg, Doofus, and the Farleys and stuff like that, these families of magic users who are sometimes doing nefarious things and sometimes just being ordinary people using magic, and they sort of have to avoid the attention of Chrestomanci, because if he finds out, then he'll stop what they're doing, because he's the authority in magic use and is basically sort of the state, the cops, that kind of vibe, which is something that isn't very comfortable in a lot of the series if you're reading it from a prison abolitionist perspective. Yeah, so it's nice that that's explored, and it mainly focuses on Marianne, who's one of the members of the Pinhole family, and Cat Chant again, and it's fine, but I don't really care about him. And I definitely did enjoy this. I think I enjoyed it more than most of them, but definitely less than the Magicians of Caprona, for example. But there are some really nice creatures in here, and I generally just thought it was a solid kids book about magic, which is not really how I felt about some of the other books in the series. And it's got a nice cover. I like this cover, and I love eggs, obviously, so I did think I would love this. Then I read a book that I have now talked about a bunch on my channel, but that's The Love Letters Between Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West. This isn't all of the letters, it's a selected edition of them, and I really enjoyed it. I'll link some of the videos where I talk about this more. I just felt quite enchanted by their love story and their care for each other and the way that they talk to each other, and it is really just so romantic at points. Then I read the 3rd book in the Earthsea cycle, and I will have talked about this too because this was the February choice or one of them from my TBR. I definitely think it was my least favourite of the 4 books of the Earthsea series I've now read. I definitely felt it was more kind of descriptive, but in a way that wasn't necessarily that useful or as enjoyable as other forms of writing, and it obviously is the last one before there's a big gap between it and Tahani, so I think that is probably also part of it. I was almost anticipating Tahani so much, or rereading it, or just the book itself, that I just felt it was very easy to compare and to be The Father Shore is not as good. Then I read another book that I have also talked about on this channel already as well, which is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo, which is actually the 2nd in a series. Well, the thing is I knew that there was a gayer one in this series. I decided that I would actually just read it in the order rather than picking that one, but then I ended up picking this one anyway. So that's when you have a gaydar and it won't stop. It's about a cleric who is travelling somewhere, and then they get accosted by 3 tiger women, and in order to try and save themselves and the people that they're with, they tell the story of this tiger woman, this famous tiger woman, and a scholar. And it is a novella and it's very short and stuff, so I don't think it sort of goes in depth with what it's doing necessarily, and I don't think that's the point, I don't feel it's fair to be so I enjoyed it less because of that, because that's not its aim. But it's just really lovely, and I think I really liked how it talks about kind of oral history and archiving, even in its quite I guess like superficial kind of way, because like the narrative is like disrupted by the tiger women like correcting or stepping in or providing more information. So yeah, and I think I will definitely try to read the first one in the series. I think there are going to be like a whole bunch more in the series, so I'll be definitely intrigued to hear about what they're like, and I might keep reading. But yeah. Then I read The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filyor, which is a collection of short stories, and I didn't particularly like it. I think I was expecting it to be written in a different, and I thought it would be like, I don't know, I guess more heightened or like better way because of the way people had talked about it already, and I just didn't really find that to be true. I just felt a little bit underwhelmed by it. I think if I had gone in without any expectations I might have also enjoyed it more. I didn't find it to be like particularly brilliant, which I did expect to. I screenshotted the names of the stories in it to see if I wanted to talk about any of them. Well, the Peach Cobbler one was quite good. I think it was Snowfall that I also really liked, but I thought, yeah, none of them really have particularly stayed with me. I feel bad because everybody seemed to really like it. But I also think, for me as well, like I do think that like short story collections are something I don't inherently dislike them, but I definitely feel like because I struggle to read things, I think sometimes it's easy to get stuck into a book that keeps going, rather than, even if that's also sometimes overwhelming, rather than like a collection of snippets that don't last for very long, so that once you're engaged you have to like re-engage yourself every time. But I mean, the characters do kind of overlap. I guess I also have kind of struggled because I don't think I've been my best like listener at the moment. Like I'm just like very distracted and quite stressed out and stuff, so I don't think I have been doing my best audiobook listening, which is fine. I don't really want to put pressure on myself to like listen to every single word, because then I won't listen to audiobooks, which is a shame because I clearly do listen well enough to understand. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Then I feel like this is kind of a curveball, but I listened to the Eleanor Marks translation of Flaubert's Madame Bovary. I like the translation. I thought it was really nice. I did expect it to be a bit like old-fashioned, I guess, but I didn't find it to be. But I also went in thinking that I probably wouldn't like the book, partially because I already knew what happened, and also because just didn't really sound like anything I would care about. I didn't think it was particularly great. Like, it was fine. I definitely didn't like how some of the disabled characters, well, all of the disabled characters I guess, were like represented in it. I think there's something to be said about the gaze that it is employing on Emma's life, and I don't really like that gaze because I do think it's like very male gazy, I guess. But yeah, I think it's just very sad, to be honest. Like, that's the main thing I took away from this book, is it's very, very sad. And it does also, I guess, speak to how there's a lot of stuff about there about how men don't understand women. And I don't even know if Flaubert like really meant to write about that, to be honest, because of the way that he like kind of packages it up. But yeah, it's just very sad, and what happens to Emma, I think it's really, really tragic. So yeah, fun reading. And then the last thing I read for February was Miss Mole by E.H. Young. And this book I actually started like months ago, and I'm really glad that I finally finished it. I had only really got like to chapter 5 or something, but then yeah, I read the rest of it, and I think it's a lovely book. I think it's kind of like a humdrum everyday life kind of book, but at the same time it's not, because of the way that it kind of like asserts that like people's inner lives, especially like older women and especially like working women's lives, are full of, you know, ecstasy and tragedy and lifefulness, and I think that's really beautiful. I do feel like it's a little bit like Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner, except from like it focuses on a working woman, and it's also a bit like The Quarry Wood, except from like the protagonist is older and she is like this like almost 40 woman who works as like a housekeeper or a lady's companion. It's post-war, like the First World War, and it was published in the 30s, so I think it's just like in the 1920s is when it's supposed to be happening. And yeah, but it ends up being this like really lovely novel also about like caring work, and both like the frustrations and like the emotions of that, and also the pleasures and the like tenderness of that. And obviously I think it's like completely valid to be working for people and to like not give a shit about them and to like hate them and like whatever, but I also think obviously people who do like sort of really direct care work often do end up feeling something for the people that they work for, and that relationship is not without its like difficulties or like fraught with like by money and by hierarchy, but it can also be really nice. And Miss Mole, who's at the centre of this book, is a really lovely main character I really liked. I just really enjoyed her charm, but also her like idiosyncrasies and her like humorous outlook on life and her resourcefulness, I guess, but also just like her sense of herself, which is lovely. Yeah, like I guess it does become a little bit predictable, but at the same time like I don't really mind it. Like, I don't begrudge that. I just found it to be really, yeah, really nice and just really like sort of mundane, but in a really like pleasurable and like compassionate or like soft-hearted way. And I think it was really nice to read a book like this about like a spinsterish existence from the perspective of a woman who's like still working and is a bit like worried about her livelihood, because like when she stops having the capacity to work, or when she like can't find a job, like what is she gonna do, rather than, you know, like the middle class women of like Lolly Willows or other books in the same kind of vein. So yeah, really like that. Not really a fan of the cover, to be honest. Like I don't really know what this woman has to do with the book like whatsoever. Like I don't think she's very moly, but anyway. Hi, I just came to like add to this wrap up because I actually ended up reading 2 more books in February, and so I'm just going to talk about them. Yes, I have already talked about this book, Valentine Ackland, A Transgressive Life by Frances Bigham, because I read it for my TBR project, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's written really nicely. I feel like the sensibility of Valentine Ackland, who was a poet, like kind of comes through in how this is written, and it does refer like a lot to her poetry too. Yeah, like I would categorize Valentine Ackland as like a non-binary lesbian, and this is just like about her life, about her like various transgressions, including lesbianism, communism, so on. And she did like a bunch of really interesting things, like including, you know, going to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and she was also like the long-time partner of Sylvia Townsend Warner. I almost said Sylvia Ackland. It's like an interesting book. I definitely did learn like stuff about Valentine and Sylvia that I didn't know, and that has moderated or like changed a little bit how I feel about them both and how I feel about their relationship together too, because they lived quite like a cottagecore lesbian-y life for a while, which is very sweet and like very romantic, but also they definitely had some issues in their relationship, especially with like sort of polyamory and this one specific other woman called Elizabeth Wade White. And I found learning about that like really, I guess, difficult. Like I didn't like that at all, and I felt sad and bad about it, and I felt especially sad for Sylvia, to be honest. But I didn't want to end on like a sad note because I do think it's lovely. It also took a while to write, partially because like it was supposed to be published in like 2000s or something, and then like the press that was going to publish it folded, but like Frances had already done like a bunch of the research and also had interviewed people who are now like dead. So because of that like about 20-year gap, it means that like this book has really benefited from the earlier research, as well as like these like declassified MI5 files which are now available about Valentine Ackland and Sylvia Townsend Warner, because yeah, they were like watched by the MI5 because they were commies. So yeah, a very interesting book, a very interesting life. And then the next book I finished was Diary of a Lonely Girl, or The Battle Against Free Love by Miriam Karpilov, and this was translated from the Yiddish by Jessica Kurzane. And this is kind of what it says. It was originally serialized in a newspaper called Die Wahrheit, I want to say, in 1916 to 1918, and then it was published with this, which I think is a really nice cover, in 1918, like as a full novel. And it's yeah, about this like young woman in New York and her attempts to find love and her like experiences with free love, or like with a whole bunch of different men. We go through like A to F, which is kind of fun. It's pretty sad, it's pretty like heteropessimistic, I would say, and it is also like a critique of male anarchist understandings and conceptions of free love, which is just like fucking all the time whenever they want. It is kind of in dialogue with like some of what Emma Goldman was saying, and like that's one of the things that made me want to pick it up, the subtitle, The Battle Against Free Love, because I'm not like anti-free love in the Victorian blah blah blah, but what I am anti is like women being mistreated for the benefit and the desires of male comrades who don't actually see them as, you know, comrades in the struggle, and who instead just see them as like further transactional sexual objects who can have agency, but only as long as it's about them getting what they want. Because like, yeah, in the introduction to this, like Jessica Kurzane, she like kind of says that it is like against free love and it's actually like pro-marriage, but I would say that it's not really either. I think it is actually just like a fundamental critique of the way that women within both structures of relationship dynamics and power structures are mistreated and used. Like it's not like you come away from this being like, yeah, the narrator of this should really get married. Like it's more just like the men that try to sleep with her in the name of free love are all pretty awful. She is in love with one of them, but yeah. And I would say also something that I think was somewhat missed in the introduction as well was just that this book is very much about, well, it's a struggle for agency. I would say that the narrator of this is like low-key stalked by, I guess, 2 of the men in this, and whilst we never get any description of actual direct sexual violence, the threat of it is almost constant because these men just like never ever listen to her, and they constantly are trying to like get her to sleep with them, especially Suitor, who's called C. He's just awful and the worst, and he gives lectures about free love and stuff, and he talks about women and men and children, and he's just such an awful person. So yeah, like it's an interesting novel. It is quite hard to read because it's like very uncomfortable, and the narrator is like, she's writing her diary literally, so we don't actually get a lot of like description of what people are doing. We often just get the dialogue, which is very interesting, and it does lead to some like really like witty and like sardonic and wry interactions, because she's obviously very clever and like astute and quick. I think it's a good translation, and I felt like it read very easily, which is partially why I think I managed to read it, because honestly, like if you described what goes on to me in this novel, I think I would be like, gosh, why would I want to read that? It's just a woman being treated badly by men. I know that Jessica Curzane just translated another of Miriam Karpilov's stories, which is called Judith, which I do want to read as well. It looks like it will also be very sad. So I read this in part because I'm trying to read Yiddish women in translation this year. I would say it's not a very comfortable book to read. It was actually, because it was serialized, I feel like maybe people could deal with it better. The main character's agency is just never really properly respected or taken into account, really. I wanted to just read this like little bit out because I thought it was very funny. This is just like an interaction between A and also I think a girl called Katya. It's not actually demarcated in the text, but the narrator has like written down, I'm an American citizen. That's A. A citizen? How banal. And who do you vote for? That's not something I share. Are you for women's rights? I'm for the right women. So yeah, maybe that kind of gives you a look into the context and the vibe of the book. Yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to say and add on. I'm pretty happy with myself having read 2 more books in the past couple days, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. And let me know if you've read any of these books or like what you thought about them, or if you have any recommendations for translated Yiddish women. Because something about this that I did want to say, well, my camera is dying, but like whatever, is that like it is kind of astounding to think that this was published before the Holocaust, in the sense that there is just like such an inherent link between Judaism and Yiddish as well, and that awful event. And it's sort of wild to think that this is like a Jewish context pre that, and obviously that's not to say that there wasn't already anti-Semitic violence and stuff, but obviously to the degree it's very different, I think. And yeah, that's like very interesting, and it was something that I only kind of really realized when I was like thinking about reading this book, and then I was holding it and I was like, wait a second, oh yeah, I don't know, it's like you don't have to use a different gaze, but you almost kind of do, because like it's just such a different space. And that's very, very sad to think about, obviously. So yeah, I hope you have a nice day when you see this, and yeah, I will talk to you another time. Bye!